Okay, I guess I'll get started here. Let's, well, I guess we're not going to turn the lights down and get mellow, but we are heading into the home stretch here. Or actually, we're probably in the home stretch here. So let me send you off with some, hopefully some good thoughts here. My name is Brian Iverson. I run product for a company called Tuebora. We're an up-and-coming IGA software vendor. And what I want to talk to you today is about augmentation of your struggling identity governance and administration. There's my pretty picture. I want to talk about augmenting your struggling identity governance and administration deployments. And the way I typically talk about this is, let's ditch the forklift. The forklift upgrade, I think, is a thing of the past. Identity governance administration solutions are deeply embedded in organizations, even when they're struggling. I worked as an analyst for 5 years. Over that time, I spoke to clients, about 500 clients a year, every year, about their IGA deployments mostly. And I was talking with people who were new to IGA and those who had been through multiple deployments. From those conversations, we were able to estimate that approximately 50% of identity governance administration deployment attempts fail, and that the rest that actually do reach some measure of success are struggling. This is not a good state of affairs. Let's just put it bluntly. I like to talk about it in terms, though, of ruin rather than necessarily failure. There are a lot of identity governance administration deployments out there that are ruined in the sense that they're going to be very difficult to upgrade. They're going to be very difficult to, let's just say, get them on the right track. And so a lot of organizations faced with this will start talking about things like, well, maybe we should replace it. Maybe we should do a redeployment. And those may be valid options in some cases, but let's just really think about this. What does failure mean? Or ruin, I think is a better term. In essence, what you're talking about here is a deployment that did not make it past the pilot stage. Or, put it another way, a deployment that is no longer growing. Identity governance administration, I like to say, is a lot like the laundry. You're never done. Your organizations are constantly adding new assets on board, and you just need to keep growing to just keep up. And so what happens is, if you stop adding new IT systems to your coverage, your overall coverage percentage is decreasing. You are on the road to ruin. So why are we in this situation? Well, we've had modern IGA for, it depends on how you count it, 10, 20 years. Probably 10 years is a better term because of the merger of provisioning and identity and access governance into IGA. But still, it has a well-deserved reputation for being big, slow, and expensive. There's a reason why we call it ERP for security. This is probably, I think the struggle is built into the nature of modern identity governance administration, where really what the vendors are delivering today, mostly, are platforms that are meant to be toolkits. They provide you with a workflow engine and some connectors and say, hey, knock yourselves out. Whatever you want to do, go for it. And so a lot of organizations feel lost, and so they will go and start doing their manual process, automating their manual processes. Well, if your manual processes worked in the first place, you wouldn't be having the issues that you're having now. Automating them just makes them go faster. Most often it means that you're doing the wrong things faster. So we have these choices. If I have a struggling identity governance, when you have a struggling identity governance administration deployment, you're one of the lucky ones, okay? So most of the time when you're faced with this, you have choices, right? Because what's going to happen is over time, the struggle is going to be more and more painful, or people are going to be aware of the struggle. And so that's how a struggling IGA deployment turns into a ruined or a failed IGA deployment, is the person who holds the purse strings gets impatient with the progress that you're making. Because one of the greatest measures of success for identity governance administration is coverage. Are you increasing coverage? Are you extending the access risk management capabilities that you have with identity governance administration into more and more systems? Increasing the size of that umbrella, I would say. So you have these choices, right? We could stay the course. You're struggling. Why would you want to do that, right? You're likely going to end up in ruin if you do that. You can upgrade, right? I mean, maybe the product that you selected isn't the problem. And I'll submit that in many cases, the product isn't the problem. It was the implementation that was the problem. It's a mess. And when you have professional services involved, it's often difficult to know where the mess really is. And so this becomes one of those things that we can do the upgrade. But the thing is, when you're talking about like re-implementing, say, or upgrading to the next version, is it even really economical to do so? Do you have so much customization that upgrading is going to be very expensive, very painful? Replacement is another one, right? It's easy to blame the vendor, right? And in some cases, the vendors haven't served you well. But again, you're going to run into the same issues that you ran into with the upgrade. It may take time until your users are able to see the value that you want to deliver. And so that's another and then plus, when you're replacing your vendor, you're often exchanging a set of known problems with a set of unknown problems. And you don't know if those problems are going to be greater or less. You don't know if you're going to be able to basically avoid making the same mistakes that you made before. So that leaves us with augmentation. Of course, that's what I'm leading up to. That's the title of this talk. So what do we get with augmentation? Well, we get to keep the parts that are sort of working and focus on the areas that are painful and incrementally improve, hopefully without degradation of existing capability. There's a lot to like about that approach, but how realistic is that? So I think it becomes more realistic today, one thing I will say about that is that multi-vendor IGA deployments are a reality. It's very common for organizations to have 1, 2, 3, 4 IGA products stitched together to provide some semblance of service for the organization. They didn't choose to do it that way initially, most of the time, very rarely in fact, but let's say that they went through a merger and acquisition and so they have these products that they stitched together, or they initially set out to do a replacement, but then they settled into coexistence. Again, this is not uncommon, and in fact, I'm sort of talking about making it a little worse if you think about it from that perspective, but hang in there with me here. So the new trend in identity governance administration is what I've been calling for a few years now, postmodern IGA. And this is really the cloud-native identity governance administration that's intended to be much more nimble than your typical identity governance administration platforms that are deployed today most often. So what is postmodern IGA? Well, first off, it's cloud-native. It is built from the ground up for the cloud. It takes advantage of native cloud capabilities like elastic scalability. It is intended to be a simple deployment, right? You turn on the service, you start paying for the service, it's there for you. It's on, the lights are on. It's full-featured. So initial forays into cloud-driven IGA were focused on, I would say, a subset of IGA capabilities. But that's not satisfactory for organizations, especially when you're talking about augmenting an existing identity governance administration deployment. You want full-featured IGA. In fact, one of the arguments that I make is that postmodern IGA needs to be more full-featured than your existing IGA platforms. It needs to deliver more of the functionality that you actually need out of the box rather than forcing you to build it. And I'm talking about things like identity lifecycle processes, and onboarding processes and application assembly processes. More things are rolled into the business process, the usage of the tool, rather than being considered things that are done by your system integrator. We want to make the business more involved in the process of extending coverage for access risk management. It's also modular. You can take what you want and leave the rest. You can start out small and grow. The whole idea here is that it is, we don't assume, we can't assume, IGA is so complex, we can't assume that you're going to do everything at once. So we have to be able to meet you at the starting point in many different places, depending on where your pain points are, where your priorities lie. It's also opinionated. I think this is very important. So again, we're not just a workflow engine with some connectors. Where we want to go with postmodern IGA is a process model, a business process model, recognizing that identity governance administration is a set of business processes that require to be executed well and structured well for you to be successful. Working in this industry for as long as I have, I've seen that there's lots of ways to do things when it comes to identity governance administration. However, only a few of those are actually work and successful and have proven to be successful. The vendors need to be providing that type of guidance in the form of the product that is being delivered. It's configuration of an existing process rather than customization of the underlying tool to build a process. It needs to be intelligent. It needs to understand the context in which you're operating, the type of business that you're operating in. Also, it needs to understand the applications that you're integrating, right? These aren't just boxes that are sitting out there that provide accounts and permissions. These have security management capabilities built in, and your tool needs to be able to accommodate the requirements or the quirks of the various applications. And then also, the idea is that with something like a Zero Active Directory, there are a number of applications riding on top of a Zero Active Directory. We actually want to bring that intelligence with us. So rather than forcing you to try to model things for successful access requests or review of Office 365 capabilities, that comes along for the ride. Okay, then we get to the last one here is intuitive, right? Should probably go without saying, but I'm sure that we're all well aware of the IT-centric user experience of so many identity governance administration tools today. And we need to get away from that. We can't force, well, first off, it's too much to expect our users to understand the chaotic nature of the underlying IT environment. So we need to be able to provide the proper, abstractions for them in order to navigate the environment in terms that are meaningful to them rather than terms that are meaningful for the IT person. So how do we get started with this? Well, my approach is just tell me where it hurts, right? I don't really care what the root causes are of this stuff. I just want to know where the pain is. And there's two approaches we can take with this. I sort of characterize them as top-down and bottom-up. A top-down approach is basically just sort of saying, hey, here's the pain item. We can validate that with stakeholders. I always prefer an encounter group type of approach rather than some sort of detailed assessment. Yes, you can hire someone to come in and figure out where your pain points are, but honestly, the people who are involved in your IAM program, the stakeholders, they know where the pain points are. Just identify them. Just know where it hurts. And then there's also some bottom-up work that you can do as well. In terms of what should we be expecting from a modern IGA tool or a postmodern IGA tool even, rather than just relying on what we have. So I'm going to help you out a little bit here. Actually, it's not going to be a lot of help because I'm sure that those of you who have existing IGA deployments are well aware of most of these pain points. These are, when I've talked with customers in the past, when I talk with customers today, these are the things that come up over and over and over again. And if you have a struggling IGA deployment, 2, 3, 4, or even more of these items will resonate with you. One is, of course, increasing coverage is really slow and expensive. This is probably the most common complaint that we hear about. It takes too much effort. It's beyond the capability of a lot of the people that you have in-house in terms of being able to add additional coverage to your system. Administrative and procedural bloat is everywhere. It's endemic. That's the nice thing about this last couple of years is it introduced a new word to my vocabulary. So what does that mean? Well, you're doing lots of requests. You're doing lots of approvals. You're doing lots of reviews. Now that you've automated stuff with your IGA tool, you're probably doing more than you ever dreamed of, and more than you can probably sustain. This is probably one of the things that we hear about is that exhaustion. And I talk about it a little bit more when I talk about access certification fatigue. But this sort of goes hand in hand with audit issues or failures. A lot of IAM programs become audit driven. Then when I'll just say, auditors are knuckleheads in many cases. And so it's somewhat crazy to let them drive the direction of your IAM program. Let them help to prioritize what gets done and how it gets solved. That's, when you talk about the emergence of administrative and procedural bloat, a lot of the time it's because auditors love to pile on controls. They aren't good at looking at your existing controls and trying to figure out how to optimize it, maybe even add by subtracting in some cases. No, we have to come out of here with a finding and a recommendation. Let's add something in. Let's add a little bit more friction into the process because that always works and makes people happy. Then you have access certification fatigue, which is really, those two previous points on steroids. One of my positions on this is if you're reviewing everything, you might as well review nothing, because people have a limited amount of attention that they can pay to this process, and so there's a reason why you have, there's a reason why a lot of the questions that I get asked have to do with how do we measure the effectiveness of our access certifications? Is it good to have a high revocation rate or a low revocation rate? My advice on that is your revocation rate should be 0. If your revocation rate is not 0, it's probably because your processes aren't very good in terms of getting people access and removing access when they don't need it. But you're always going to have a non-zero revocation rate. A high revocation rate is not an indication that you have an effective access review process. IT-centric user experience, again, very common. We have seen some movement recently with products to introduce maybe a more attractive interface. But the thing is, we're still expecting our users to understand the chaotic IT environment. And so, how reasonable is it for us to expect that a customer knows that they're going to need an account on this system in order to access this application, right? Or how reasonable is it for us to expect that our users know the difference between adding access and modifying access? It makes sense to a practitioner, but it does not make sense to a user. And I'll say it doesn't make sense to me either. Poor data quality, common complaint. What are you doing about the data quality though, right? You can't just sit there and blame people and say HR needs to improve their processes. No. HR is not your friend. Poor data quality is part of part of what you signed up for and dealing with. What are you doing to monitor the quality of the data that's coming in? I'm willing to bet you that your current IGA tool is not helping you to monitor your data quality. If you're doing anything to monitor and clean up data, it's outside of your IGA tool. Oops. And then finally, inadequate transparency. This comes in many forms. This is sort of like a catch-all. Reporting, okay, yeah, that's fun. Dashboards, pretty, but how actionable are they? Metrics, good luck. This is one of those things that it's very difficult for a modern IGA vendor to deliver metrics because they don't have an idea of what the process is because they expect you to roll your own process. So how can they come in with metrics? This is one of the advantages of postmodern IGA is that when you have processes, when you have a process framework in which you're saying this is the way you should be managing identity, one of the things you can deliver is metrics. So when we're evaluating these pain points, and I'm just about to wrap up here, is we want to utilize both bottom-up and top-down diagnostic methods. I talked about, top-down is where's your pain, bottom-up is you need a map of the territory, framework within which to do it. You want to look for clusters. Again, it's very easy for us to get wrapped up in why does this pain exist? What's causing this pain? But you know what? I'm not talking about doing surgery here. I'm talking about prosthetics, okay? We don't want to necessarily go in and fix the problem. We want to work around the problem. And that's the whole story of augmentation. So that means don't overanalyze your existing pain points. And then finally, focus on the relative intensity of pain signals. And again, you want to find these clusters, because when you're going to augment, you're going to try to basically bypass a part of your existing deployment and let it lay fallow while you're hopefully getting a better service. So I have a framework here. I'm just going to flash it here. It's in the slide deck. You should be able to download the slide deck. When I say have a map of the territory, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I consider to be my postmodern IGA deployment framework. Is it perfect? No. Is it great? Debatable. Is it useful though? Yes. I can tell you though that this is a generic framework though. This isn't like, my product doesn't even conform to this framework, right? But this is good for those exercises like checking the box, where I'm saying, have we thought about how this needs to be done? And that's a good way to use a framework like this to give you a map of the territory. So let's just talk really quickly about benefits of augmentation. Number one, rapid time to value. You're not having to, because of the nature of cloud software, you're not having to take care of lots of infrastructure. Having processes out of the box, best practices, helps you with, bypassing what you're doing. We can make incremental improvements to our system, right? And again, the rapidity is important here, is that we want to basically make incremental improvements without degrading our existing services. Now, I'm not saying that we're not going to make ripples. I mean, if you're changing an interface or changing a process, people will notice that. But hopefully, you're doing it for the better, and they'll notice that it is for the better. You still need to do change management when you're talking augmentation. And then I think one of the more unexpected ones here is injecting new ideas into your IAM program. Think of this as pollination, right? Is that, if you've been tied to a single vendor for a long time, it might get staled. I mean, I'm not saying anything about I've known all the IGA vendors, right? They hire smart people, great people. No IGA vendor has a monopoly, though, on all the smart people in the market. And they all have great people who are good at what they do. It's good, though, to get ideas from other vendors to help you to sift through and identify what's best for you. So my recommendations are, number one, don't abandon an IGA deployment that's merely struggling. Again, you're one of the lucky ones if you're struggling. That means you haven't failed. Utilize a forward-looking IGA reference model to locate augmentation opportunities. What I mean by that is don't just tie yourself to your existing vendor's framework. A framework that made sense a few years ago. Think of forward-looking. You can borrow mine, look for other frameworks out there, come up with something that works for you, but get something that shakes you out of the current state mode. Again, don't worry excessively about analyzing or about finding the root causes of these problems. You're going to drive yourself mad. I've looked at a lot of IGA deployments. They're duct tape on top of duct tape on top of duct tape. And then finally, synchronization is your friend. Your legacy platform may not have the ideal API coverage. That's okay. It would be great if they did. It would be great for interoperability if they did. However, in most cases, I have found, in fact, I shouldn't be qualifying it. In every case, I've found that it is possible to use synchronization in some way to allow you to interoperate between multiple IGA tools. And that aids significantly in augmentation. Is that the best approach? No. But does it work? Yes. And is it pragmatic? Yes. And I think overall, that's what I want you to leave with, is it's important to be pragmatic about, first off, recognizing that you are probably struggling if you haven't failed. And then two, that it is possible to do better without having to go all out and replace what you have. And, because honestly, you are going to replace what you have, the software that you have. That's the nature of complex software. It's just don't do it all at once. And that's That's the main thing. So with that, I want to thank you. I think I left a couple minutes for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please, and if not, be sure to rate this presentation in the app. I believe that you can do that, and provide comments and take note of who I am and who Tuebora is. We love this stuff. I live this stuff, breathe this stuff, and if you have issues, talk to us. Love talking the philosophy of IGA.